Hello and welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to go over the basics of the dodge, burn, and sponge tools, and we're going to use these specific tools for retouching our images, and we're going to learn more about that in upcoming lessons. So let's first go over the basics of these three tools, and I'll explain how they are used. These three tools are located right here on our toolbar. And if you click on this icon, you will then see a list of the three tools. We have our dodge tool, burn tool, and sponge tool. So whichever one you last used will be visible in the toolbar, and you can access the tools with the same keyboard shortcut, which is the letter O. But if you're on the burn tool and you want the actual dodge tool, then you will have to come to the toolbar to actually select that. So each one of the tools will give you a different result. With the dodge tool, what that's going to do is it's going to lighten up areas of the image that you apply it to. The burn tool is going to darken different areas of the image where you apply that tool to. And then the sponge tool is going to either increase the saturation or decrease the saturation based on the options that you select in the options panel. So when you select one of the three tools, you're going to have some different options up here in the options panel to make modifications to that tool to fine-tune what you need to do. Now for the dodge tool and the burn tool, these options are pretty much going to be the same, and the sponge tool will give you different options. So let's go over those different options so you have a better idea of how you can use them. So the first thing we're going to notice is the tool that we selected right here with a drop-down arrow right next to it, and if we click on it, we can see additional options in here. Unfortunately, it gets a little confusing because these options are presets for brushes in general and not for these specific dodging, burning, and sponge tools. And we can see that when we click on current tool only, it gives us a message that no tool presets are defined for this specific tool. So I wouldn't worry about the options in here because they're not available for those three tools. Right next to that, we have some brush settings that we can apply to our tools, which are the size of the brush, the hardness of the edge of the brush. It can be super soft or it could be a hard edge, or you can choose predefined brush tips that are different than the standard default round brushes. So if you want to paint with a different type of brush, you can select that from here. And then right next to that, you can also access brush settings that will give you more options for defining the brush. We're not going to go over all of these options right now. We'll cover those in a future section. So typically when I'm dodging and burning, I'm going to use a basic soft edge or a hard edge brush, depending on what I'm trying to retouch. And then as far as other options, I'm not really using these options when I'm dodging and burning. Right next to that, we have range, which will give us an option to apply our edits to different tonal values of our image. So by default, we're going to be applying our edits in the mid-tones of our image. But if we want to apply the edits to the shadows or the highlights, we can make those selections from here. You can also adjust the exposure of that particular tool, and that's basically allowing you to adjust how much of that brush you are going to apply in a certain area. So if you want to apply 100% of the effect of that tool in a specific area, then you would set it to 100%. Or you can build it up gradually by applying a smaller amount of that edit and then build it up over a period of strokes that you continue to add over that same area, and that adds the effect gradually versus all at once, and it helps you blend in that edit with the rest of the image so it doesn't look unnatural. Next, we have an option to apply airbrush style buildup effects, which is similar to applying your exposure in increments or multiple brush strokes. So if you want to use an airbrush style application where it's going to build up that edit over a period of air strokes or brush strokes, you can do that with this tool, but it's mostly used with drawing tablets and it's not something that I use. Same with this one here. This one's going to affect the pressure that you apply on your tablet and will allow you to build up that edit based on how hard you press on your tablet. So if you use a tablet and you want to apply those types of effects, those building up of the brush strokes, you can activate these icons here. This option here, Protect Tones, will minimize the clipping and the shadows and the highlights, and it will keep your colors from shifting. So this is a good option to have turned on when you're dodging and burning. If you're not worried about clipping data or detail in your highlights and shadows, then you can keep it off, but it's something that I typically leave on. All right, so the options for your burn tool are pretty much the same. The one thing you're going to notice though is that your exposure may be different because it's going to keep that information that you used the last time you used that tool. So if I switch back to my dodge tool, we can see that the exposure is 50% versus 37%. So just keep that in mind. If you're switching tools, you may need to change the exposure depending on what you're trying to do. If we take a look at the sponge tool, you're going to notice that some of the options change. Under mode, we have saturate and desaturate. Then next to that, we have flow instead of exposure. So flow is going to allow you to add the edit every time you continue applying that edit in the same location, which is different from the exposure option where you have to click and then re-add, click and re-add, and it builds it up based on the number of new strokes that you add every time you click. So flow is the opposite. Hold down your mouse button, and the more you go over that specific area, the more that edit is going to be applied in that area, and that's how you build up the edit to look natural. The other option we have that is new is vibrance, and this will allow you to avoid clipping fully saturated or desaturated colors. So it's just another option for controlling how much saturation or desaturation that you apply based on the colors that you're trying to edit. And I'm going to show you the differences between having that turned on and turned off in just a second. All right, so I did include this particular file in the resources folder that you downloaded from the beginning of the course, so you can practice with all these different tools and using all the different options on this particular file, and that'll give you a better sense of how these tools work in the highlights, midtones, shadows, and in the colors of your images as well. So you can practice that once you're done with this lesson. So let me go ahead and show you visually how each one of these tools will affect your images. So let's go ahead and start with our dodge tool, and I'm going to set the brush hardness to 100%, and I'm going to create a straight line with each one of the different options so we can keep them separated much easier that way. Now here's a quick tip. In order to create a straight line with your brush tool, if you hold down your shift key as you apply that brush, then it will create that straight line. If not, then you're going to have a hard time creating a straight line. So here we've applied the dodge tool to the left side of the file here in the grayscale area, and we can see how it's applied to the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows. And because we have the midtones selected, it's mostly applying that edit in the midtones. Maybe a little bit in the highlights here, but not so much here or in the shadows over here. Now if we select shadows and apply the brush here, we can see it's mostly being applied in the shadows, and then the same thing is going to happen with highlights as well. It's going to apply it in the highlights more than in the shadows. So that's how you apply them to the different tonal values of your image. Now as you can see, when I was brushing over, it's keeping the amount of the edit in there based on the exposure setting that I have set, which is 50%. If I go back over those areas again, it will then add another 50% to them, and we can see that it's getting much brighter in those areas. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the burn tool next. And I'm going to need to make my brush size a little bit smaller so we can fit everything in there. Actually, let's go back to the original file so we can see them separately. Okay, so I have my burn tool selected. Again, I need to make sure that my hardness is set to 100% because it does remember the settings that you used for that specific tool the last time you used it. We have the midtone selected for the range, and I'm going to set the exposure to 50%. So it's basically going to do the same thing as the dodge tool, except for this time it's going to make the areas darker instead of lighter. So let's check out shadows. It's making the shadows much darker versus the highlights. And then highlights is just the opposite. The highlights will be darker versus the shadows. So that's dodging and burning. Dodging will make your image lighter in the areas where you apply it. Burning will make the areas where you apply it darker. Okay, so next we have the sponge tool, which will allow you to desaturate or saturate the colors in your image. I'm going to set my flow to 50% and the hardness to 100% as well. Let's go ahead and turn off vibrance for now. And we're going to desaturate the colors in our image. And then if we turn on vibrance, and then we can see how that is being applied differently versus having it turned off. Let's turn it off again and check out saturate, which will make the colors more saturated. And then with vibrance, it gives you a different effect. Now, the one thing you're going to notice with flow is it's adding 50% the first time I pass over an area, but when I pass over that area again, it's applying another 50%, which is different from exposure, which is only applied 50% on the first brush stroke, and then you have to release your mouse button and apply another brush stroke over it to add another 50%. So if I just click and drag down, it's only adding 50% there, but if I go back over that area again, it's continually adding more and more, and I don't need to click and create a new brush stroke. All right, so that's the dodge, burn, and sponge tools. These are 3 awesome tools to help you custom edit your images, and we're going to apply these tools on images in upcoming lessons. So if you're ready to get started on using them on images, I'll see you in the next lesson.